Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bring Your Best Friend for our talk today with our two folks. My name's David Corwin, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Integrative Studies and in Women and Gender Studies. And it is my pleasure today to introduce our two speakers. First, we have Aminatou Sow, who is a writer, interviewer, and cultural commentator. She's a frequent public speaker whose talks and interviews lead to candid conversations about ambition, money, and power. Aminatou lives in Brooklyn. We also have Friedman, who is a journalist, essayist, and media entrepreneur. She is a contributing editor to The Gentlewoman. Every Friday, she sends a popular email newsletter, and Anne lives in Los Angeles. Together, Aminatou and Anne host a long-running podcast called Your Girlfriend, and Big Friendship is both Aminatou and Anne's first book. So, Anne and Aminatou, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. In attendance is a wide variety of people from campus, but also my public speaking and critical thinking skills class who have read your book, and I know we'll have good questions for you later. So we'll get started. Let's start with Aminatou. My first question for y'all is, how did you come to this work, specifically around friendships? And why did you decide that your friendship was one that the world needed to know more about?
David, thank you for having us. What a big question. I think I'm going to answer the last one first. I think that we actually do not think that our friendship is so special that it needs to be an example. I think that what this work really found us through curiosity. Anne and I have been friends for 12 years. We met in our mid to late 20s, which was a time, I think, for a lot of people when you're in transition, it's post-college. We were living in Washington, D.C., a town that is very much a point of transit for a lot of people. And we had space in our lives for each other. But immediately we fell into, without really talking about it or saying anything, we fell into this friendship where we were modeling, I would say, almost family for each other. And chosen family is a term that a lot of people know, but we really did this very naturally. We've had, keys to each other's apartments. We would cook for each other. We really went fast from like, we're hanging out at a bar to hanging out at home. And but also we are women who are very curious. And I would say that we are very nerdy. And so a lot of we love an organized hangout. That is not true for everyone, but for us, like really talking about work is something that was important. And we're people also who, like politics are important to us. We care a lot about policy. And when we started thinking about the way that we had organized our lives, just very naturally, just fell into it. It was not a choice. And you pit that against really what family structure is supposed to be and, and the role that friendship plays. I think that for two people who were socialized as women, we really were aware that, friendship is something that's cute and nice and everyone is supposed to have friends, but also the predominant message that we were getting in our 20s is you need to like put the time in at work and build a career. And also you should be finding some sort of, very heterosexual mate situation. And those pressures get put on you like very intensely. And for us, we found ourselves like resisting all of that and finding a new kind of family structure. I also think that friendship is something that is very infantilized, but through the work that we are doing, I think that we are really trying to really excavate the idea that you can resist capitalism and white heteropatriarchy by organizing your life a little differently. And I say this all the time, I was like, let adults be adults and make the choices that they want to make. And so for us, it's really nice to take something that is very dismissed and actually go, there are a lot of policy implications here. There are a lot of possibilities here. Friendship is a site of politics. And so it was very exciting to be in friendship, but also in a collaboration with someone who believes that in a really radical way.
No, that's great. And it's certainly, when you think about patriarchy and power, it's certainly, there's certainly a feminist reading for friendships, right? As we think about the fluidity of relationships and also how feminists historically really relied on friend communities really for change, certainly. Mm-hmm. So Anne, I'm going to direct our next question to you, which bounces off of this one. So globally, there are some cultures that have more commitment, even like legalized commitments with friendships than we do in the US. Why are friendships such an under-discussed topic in the US more generally?
I mean, I think all of those big terms that Aminatou just used really get to the heart of it. The way that US policy is structured is around a heterosexual nuclear family where those units live separately, like mom, dad, 2.5 kids, a dog, like that sort of thing. And policy was designed to encourage people to separate from living in community, to rely only on this tiny unit with these really strict definitions. And, you even see it like, I think when we sat down to look at the ways that our friendship was feeding us and feeling revolutionary, some of that is because we take time to celebrate it and say like, okay, actually celebrating the anniversary of our friendship is important, or like making a point to gather with friends in really structured ways feels important, because culturally, the dominant culture in the United States is, obviously there's a lot of cultures in this country, but the dominant policy driving culture is like, hey, our families gather for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we celebrate marriage and the birth of children. These things are not just like kind of suggestions from the dominant culture. It's like, you're kind of either doing it by the book or you're creating an alternative. There's, in some ways, this book is represents a real desire that we had to kind of say like, look, actually, being in a 12-year friendship is really adult, is really hard. Like, that needs to be celebrated in the way that, we are taught right now to only celebrate maybe a wedding anniversary. So, I don't know. I think like I cannot sit here and give you like a list of legislation or things like that. But once you start unpacking all these different areas of life, from, housing to who gets to vote to like how finances are structured in this country, you really start to see that we are all encouraged to not see ourselves as adults until we are in this kind of like heteronuclear family structure. And and we're adults who are trying to find a different way.
Yeah, we don't stop having friends after high school, right? And many, and as you all can speak to, our closest friends, we often meet right after that, certainly. So shine theory. So we got to talk about shine theory, because that's what everybody seems to comment on in my class and when other people I know that's read this book. So Aminatou, so shine theory, what is it and why is it important, and why do you have a whole chapter in here about it?
Yeah, shine theory is something, again, that came really, I say like naturally to Anne and I think that it's, some of that is really the luck of the draw. Sometimes you find someone where you really have a cultural and like emotional affinity with. But for us, shine theory was the organizing principle of our friendship. Like we always said to each other early on, I don't shine if you don't shine. And it was really a way of just affirming each other. I think that, again, the dominant culture has this narrative that, again, like women are very catty and do not support each other, or marginalized people in general are always competing for the same resources. And, and that is true in capitalism. When you look at the way that work is organized, or the way that, you are really encouraged to believe that there is a ginormous piece of the pie, but whatever your identity is, there can only be one. There is this real Highlander mentality of, there will only be one woman, there will only be one Black person, there will only be one queer person, and we are all supposed to be competing for it. But the thing that we saw in our lives is that, like, first of all, that narrative is not true, and it really, I think, it is out there to discourage ambition for marginalized people, and also does not recognize the fact that we are very supportive of each other, and we actually, all of the resources that we have under capitalism are resources that we have had to give each other, And so when I think about the people who have encouraged me, whether it was active or not, or they knew that they were doing it, or the people who were models of possibility for me, they were never white men. And I had people in my life who were very generous. When I met Anne, I was unemployed in a town that really prizes, like, what do you do and what are you doing? And everyone is, like that after college feeling of just like, what are you doing with your life? And I was doing nothing with my life. And
beg to differ, but anyway.
But you know what I mean? I think that it's, I really feel like a tenderness for, it's like when I talk to, especially college students now, like I think about that time and I'm just like, wow, like this is a really precarious, tough time. And it's really, you know, it's an important time of identity building. But for me, here was a friend who was very generous with contacts, very generous with resources, very generous with like her time and ideas. And I was like, oh, like we can all do this. And I think that the reason that Shine Theory resonates so much with your students and other people is not because Anne and I invented it. It's because we gave a language to something that a lot of people are already naturally doing, you know? And I think that it's why vocabulary and language is so important. We did not invent this wheel. Like people, marginalized people have been helping each other since the beginning of time, especially when I think about like academia or, you know, the areas of work that we are in. The only reason that we even get a seat at the table is because someone models that for us, or someone like whispers in your ear that it's possible, you know, and we really think of Shine Theory both as this helping each other, but also really giving each other information about where the danger is, you know. Shine Theory is telling each other that there are abusive people in our system. Shine Theory is sharing salary information with each other and being transparent. Shine Theory is you turning down the job, but recommending someone else in your network for it. It is really thinking about it as a system. And it doesn't mean that you have to make, you know, like time for every single person who emails you or calls you. Like that, we don't have the resources for that. And in fact, marginalized people are really taxed with having to solve these problems, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And all we are saying is think about who your community is and think about who your peers are and resist what capitalism is telling you about how you are supposed to treat them, you know, and really build bridges across. Like when Anne always says, you know, she's like, kiss down, don't kiss up. And 15 years into a career for me, I was like, it is the assistants that we helped and the interns that we helped. Those are the people that are hiring us now, you know, like power is something that is always shifting, and Shine Theory recognizes that. And it also says that you can both be ambitious. And if you open up your resources and you share with people, it is also to your advantage. And we have really found that to be true.
And thank you. I really appreciate the connection to capitalism, because that's so important with both of your points about having to need the nuclear family, but also in order to function in the world as an adult, that's an expectation, but that's all very much rooted in capitalism and, you know, and keeping that up, certainly. So, Anne, you also have a whole chapter on friend webs. So why do we need to be conscious of our friend webs? What are they, for starters? Why do we need to be conscious of those? And what do we learn from these type of connections?
Well, no relationship and certainly no friendship exists in a vacuum. You know, we are all affected by the people around us. And sometimes that looks like maybe a named and explicit community, you know, like throughout our friendship, particularly in the early days, we had like, you know, a very sprawling and nebulous like web of friends in common, you know. I mean, people who we saw regularly. I think some of that was you know, the age we were and the place where we met. I think college can feel a little bit like that sometimes, where everyone is you know, connected in different ways. And the friend web is really like acknowledging that, like, hey, friendships don't look like the same, you know, 6 people at the same coffee shop every day. Just totally, yes, thank you. I was giving you a cue to show your shirt. You know, like friendships are not like, they're not, it's not always clear, like the connections to people. And I think we wanted to develop some language that acknowledged, like, you know, we're all in community together, first of all, that like, the people who are really close to Aminatou are connected to me, even if I might not have like a first degree direct friendship with them. You know, I'm still in community with those people because they care for her and she cares for them. And I think like, and then, you know, there are mutuals, like people we share between us who we both love. And I think that recognizing the complexity of some of those relationships can, I don't know, for us has been important to being able to talk about conflict that arises between those people. You know, being able to articulate hey, you know, like this person is really close to you and I love and respect them for that, but maybe they're not my first degree person. And how can we be open about that and just be cool with it rather than have it be a point of stress that we're not all 6 equal people on that couch who love each other the exact same way. So, and that chapter for us too was born out of like a lot of strife and hard-won lessons about how we orient ourselves differently in community with friends. You know, not everybody has the same expectations, and being able to talk openly about like, hey, like this is what all these people in our community mean to me in different ways, and what I'm expecting from them and giving to them in return. I don't know, if we could have talked about that more openly early on, we could have really saved ourselves a lot of conflict. So Friend Web is just exactly what it sounds like: complex, interconnected.
Nice. And when we think about it in relation to chosen family, I like your point about being able to talk about our friend webs with other people within the friend web, because I always say in a family context, I'm an only child and no one gets my parents. So like, I can't ever do that, right? And so the friend webs, that sometimes feels that way too, right? You're having, it may not be a conflict, it may be an example of Shine theory, right, with a friend, but you can't talk to anyone else about it because they don't quite get the person. So that really is important and something I hadn't thought about until just now. So Aminatou, as critical thinkers, why do we need to unpack our friendships and how we communicate within them? Because, you know, on a college campus, we're supposed to be training the next generation of critical thinkers. So I think that's what's important.
Yeah, I mean, like friendship is a really important and formative relationship, you know, and I think that we really relegate it to something that happens in childhood. And, you know, even the stereotype that it's easy to make friends, it's just not true. It's like, I remember my first day on my campus and being like, who are my people going to be? Like that is intensely hard work. It is emotional work. It is important work. And, you know, and I think that it is so important to know that friendship is a site of politics. We make choices about the people that are in our lives. We make choices around the decisions that they make. And I know for myself that a lot of my activism and a lot of my critical thinking is born out of the relationships that I've had. The first protest I ever went to is because someone else suggested and took me to it. The first, you know, like I remember my first my first women in gender studies class at the University of Texas being so intimidated, you know, and looking around the room and looking at this professor and thinking like, what are we doing here? You know, and I think that for a lot of us, for as much as we relegate friendship to this thing that is, you know, it sits like right under family and sometimes right under work as you get older, the truth is that for a lot of us, friendship is how we learn how to love people. It is how we learn how to be real adult humans in the world. And, you know, and a lot of people, we've thrown that term chosen family so many times. All of your friends will not be your chosen family, but if you do have friends who become your chosen family, the operative word there is not chosen, it's actually family. All of the dynamics that happen in your family will happen in your friendships. You know, we talk about, our friend Beth Pickens always makes a distinction between logical and biological family. And in the logical family, you will have conflict, you will have fight, like everything, every dynamic that you have with your family will crop up, and learning how to communicate through those makes you a better person in the other relationships that you have. Imagine a world in which, you know, like a married person, for example, does not put all of the emotional work into their marriage because they're able to spread that out in other relationships. You have different places where you can do that, or a world in which your friends are an outlet for work. And so the reason that we think so critically about it is because it's an intensely formative relationship. It is a relationship that for a lot of people is actually at the center of their lives, but it is not recognized or celebrated. You know, I think about the way that a lot of this language that we use around revolutionary friendship, if you think about it, is really born out of queer people's lives, like living out loud. Like queer scholarship has been so important to this area of work. And also just, I think that the incredibly generous way that queer people have just like modeled for everyone an alternative to this like family, the 2.5 kids and the whatever. And I think it's why it's resonating. It's not because it's new. It's like this has always existed friendship is the main course, not the dessert of a lot of people's lives, but it is not recognized in policy. It is not recognized in society. It is not, even for me and Anne, like people who are, I would say, like we sit on the very left end of the spectrum politically, even celebrating our anniversary, or we used to go to weddings together because, that thing of going to weddings in your 20s and 30s, it's expensive, it's annoying. There's an expectation that you will have a social escort. Like, that's so dumb. It's like, why do you need to bring a date that's someone that you're maybe sexually interested in? Bring a friend that you will dance with. But all of that, it sounds so small and silly, but actually that is how we model change for each other, and for us, we used to sign wedding gifts like jointly. We were like, we're the Sow Friedmans, here you go, half and half. I don't need a partner to do that with. But that, for example, has huge repercussions on my finances down the line, and so it's like you think about these really small things, or bringing a friend to a wedding as your date instead of bringing a social escort also signals, I don't need to be participating in this kind of archaic ritual, even though I'm here to celebrate you. And so I don't know, I just think that friendship is so important because it is so undervalued, and bringing this kind of really like critical thinking to it actually is the key to undermining patriarchy. And it is the key to really changing how we organize as a society, like for people who are single and live, for people who want to form different bonds of family, for people who, I like my mind is racing because there are just so many ways that, friendship can really undermine the system, for people with disabilities, for people who are not, heterosexual, for people of color. There is just so much power in bringing this kind of analysis and really just challenging what the system is, because for a lot of us, friendship is at the center of our lives.
Thank you so much for that. So, Anne, why do college students need more education around healthy friendships and boundaries within these types of relationships?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind when you say that is just like all of the like mistakes and strife that I have like experienced and caused in my friendships, particularly when I was younger. Which I think a lot of them had their root in this idea that if a friendship is good, it'll just work. It'll just be fine. And if it's not just working, or if it requires any effort, that means it's not worth it, or it's toxic and you need to, get out of town. And that is simply not true, like from this like perch of, having thought about this so deeply with Aminatou and like this process of writing about it, and then also just reflecting on our own friendships. I think about like if my college self had been told, like, listen, you say your friends are really important to you, and that's true, but part of what that means is work, like, and particularly work once you are in a new set of circumstances. And by that, I mean, in college, my friendships were formed in this one context. Like we were all on campus together. We were all, we came from maybe different backgrounds, but we were kind of on equal footing in the sense of like, we were at the same place in our lives. And that's just never really true again, like moving forward into the world, you are going to be faced in your friendship with all kinds of tectonic shifts underneath it. Someone gets sick, someone gets into a romantic relationship, someone moves far away to a different time zone, someone gets a job that puts them on a totally different work schedule, and now you like don't see each other easily anymore. I mean, the truism of friendship is that if it's going to last, you have to be able to kind of say like, whoa, something really big has changed here. And that could be any number of things, but if we don't talk about it, the friendship is not going to survive. And so why I think it's important to know that in college is because, like I said, certainly there are shifts in friendships in college, like don't get me wrong, but I think for me, I had to learn that later on in life to be like, okay, for this friendship to work, we need to both account for this change and actually kind of verbally commit to each other. Like we both want to be here on the other side of, whatever this big tectonic shift is.
Also, yes, absolutely. So, Aminatou, this is the last question from me, okay? But it's kind of a big one. So, in a post,
I'm turning my camera off. Goodbye. Can't answer.
Get out, right? Yeah, in a post, in a post Me Too, fake news, and George Floyd world, why more than ever do conversations about friendships matter?
I mean, that is a ginormous question. And it matters because we have said repeatedly, friendship is a site of politics. You know, friendships are strengthened or destroyed by the way that people respond to these big events, you know, and I know that we're collapsing police violence and sexual harassment and whatever, and you know, and there's a way to unpack all of those. But I really think that the dynamics that we have in friendship, the ways that we can both have grace and patience for each other and also know someone for a long time and be shocked at how they react at something, is just very telling. And you know, that thing that Anne was saying about friendships being so formative in that time, like I have a very solid group of friends that I made in college, and we have, you know, like transitioned into like being working professionals and all of that stuff. And I am still constantly shocked at how events in the news or events in the world will challenge our friendship, because these were not things that we experienced. And I say that even as someone who was a Black person on a predominantly white campus. It's not like I did not have conversations about race or conversations about gender. This stuff is really hard, you know, and it's really easy actually to like challenge someone on Twitter or get mad at a stranger or someone that you do not know. That stuff for me comes very easily, and I do not care. When the politics are happening between two people who know each other, it's a little harder because it's hard to talk about. It's if you have not had the muscle of talking about consent in your relationship for a long time, even with a friend, when something like Me Too happens and you start hearing their reaction and your reaction, it can be really destabilizing. Or you can realize we're actually on the same page about this. And it is just harder to talk about. And I think one thing that I am always challenged by is how reactionary I can be in a public setting and how very challenged I can be in a private setting. And the truth is that what is happening in the private setting often is more important than what you are signaling outside. And so again, like friendship is important here because there is a lot of forgiveness and grace. You know, Anne and I wrote a chapter in our book, for example, about race. And even for two people who are, again, like very left, we are very adept about talking about this. What happened to George Floyd was not a surprise to us, and it's not something that will challenge our friendship because race does not happen just in the news. You know, like what we witness is just like tragic and awful, and you know, like I'm still affected by it. But if George Floyd is the first time that race enters the conversation of a friendship, you know, like that's also tough. It's like racism is always happening, sexism is always happening, and so. I think that we are lucky in that the news and events do not necessarily challenge us because we know that, you know, that has just been happening in the world and it's part of our dynamic. But even in our chapter about race, we, you know, and we've been friends for over a decade now, we still have to recalibrate to each other where this is a friendship between a white woman and between a Black woman. And, you know, and for as much as we try to protect the bubble of our friendship, which everybody does, it's like between the two of you, you know, you like the same stuff, you're interested, you know, like you like each other, it's the cocoon. The world will always challenge that because we live in a world of systematic racism, systematic misogyny towards women, and all kinds of hatred towards people who are LGBTQ, you know? And so when I think about what is happening in the world and how that seeps into the friendship, it's completely inevitable. You have to learn to communicate around it. And also the decisions that you make in your friendship affect everyone else around you because we live in a community. If you are in close friendships with people who are racist, which happens to all of us, that has repercussions when we have elections. It has repercussions when we are choosing our next elected officials. It has repercussions around who else will want to be in community with you. You know, if you are friends with someone who is transphobic, it 100% affects the way that our laws are made. It affects the safety of people around you. And it also says something about you. And I say that knowing full well that we all have people in our lives that are problematic. And we all have people in our lives that we sometimes cannot disconnect from. Like there are people that you can go, great, cut you off. And then there are other people where you do have to be in community with them. And it's hard. And the ways that you communicate and signal around that, again, are very deeply important. And, you know, and I think that friendship, again, the reason that it's so important is because it is a relationship that's more expansive. Most people will be in romantic relationships with a fewer number of people than they will be in friendships with other people. And so I think that that's also important to recognize. Like friendship is a larger web. It is a larger network. The repercussions of it travel very far. And, you know, and we are just not socialized to learn to take it so importantly. You know, I want to go back to that question that you asked, Anne, about why it's also important for college students. I think about friendships that have faded away from college, whether they were people that you cut off or people that you just naturally faded away from. If I could go back and revisit those, a lot of those can be repaired, you know, and it was truly because we were just not talking about it. And there is just no way, there was no vocabulary around it. And our society has so much vocabulary around how you can kind of communicate around your biological family. There's therapy for that. We have a lot of communication around how you can repair a romantic relationship. We have therapy for that. We have plenty of resources. No one is teaching you how to be a good friend. And the truth is that if you can be a good friend, you can be a better family member. You can be a healthier person in your romantic relationships. And, you know, and to bring it back to the world that you were talking about, to Trump, to George Floyd, it's important to recognize those flashpoint moments because they're everywhere. But it is also important to recognize that if that is the first time that your friendship is challenged in that way, if you are hearing of Black trans women dying and there is a huge news event and that's the first time that you talk about it in your friendship, that is also something to take a note of because those things are happening all the time and they're happening close to you and so much does not make the news. And so, you know, I say that to say that the flashpoints are important, but the truth is that these dynamics are everywhere and there are things to really pay attention to.
I love how you bring all that together. Thank you so much. So now we're going to transition to our questions from our audience. So the first one we have here is, what have been some of the joys and challenges of creating your podcast? And maybe we can start with Anson.
Well, the podcast was really born in joy. I mean, like the way it happened, I have to say is like, this was a time, 2014, when people did not like make money off of podcasts. Most people didn't listen to podcasts. It was just kind of like a weird niche. And our good friend Gina Delvac, who produces the show, suggested to the two of us that we would make good hosts. And really, it was just like the idea of like recording our conversations, or like, oh, we get to like hang out in a structured way. It's that thing Aminatou mentioned that we both love. Like, hi, we get to learn how to use audio equipment and hang out with each other. Like, cool, fine, great. So really like joy is the operative beginning like mood, I think, of our podcast. And then the challenge, which, you know, came actually fairly quickly thereafter, is like, we didn't envision it as a business. You know, we didn't really think about it as something that other people would want to listen to. And so there were points at which we had to decide, okay, like, are we gonna sell ads? I guess we're gonna do that because a lot of people are listening. Oh, that means we need a bank account. Oh, we need to incorporate to get a bank account. I mean, a lot of like business stuff that we really backed into that I will tell you did not spark joy.
Yeah, we were not girl bosses. We are not girl bosses.
We were just
like whatever the opposite of a girl boss is. We are women, not bosses.
we were like, how can we just keep doing the fun part? But also, you know, we're not girl bosses, but at the same time, we had this real like, oh, if all these comedy bros are cashing in, like we should make a little money too. You know, we have like some sense of like, right. So I don't want to be like, we didn't want to get paid for it, but it was like not a joyful aspect. And I think, you know, another really joyful thing has been being able to highlight our friends, people who are in our extended community, people whose work we think is really valuable and like deserves a bigger audience, and help them find that bigger audience. Like that is such a joy and a privilege. So that remains true, you know, like that is a forever thing. And it's also true that like I never get tired of hearing what Aminatou thinks about anything. Like we could sit on the Zoom for another 4 hours and you could just ask her questions about like what she had for breakfast today, and I'd be like, tell me more.
I feel the exact same way about you. So it really works out for us.
Yeah, I would agree, just being with you for the last 30 or so minutes. Yes. So next is, and we'll ask Aminatou this one. How do you build trust with a new friend, which is something you talk about in the book, and rebuild that trust with old friends?
I mean, if I had the answer to that, I would not be on the Zoom today. You know, I think it is like every relationship. Like when I really think about the early moments in my relationship with Anne, like nothing was calculated. You know, it is the same thing. It's the same pursuit that you have when you are trying to seduce a romantic partner. You put your best foot forward, you do all the things, you fall into it. And friendship really has, you know, more flexibility there. And the thing that's interesting is that in a healthy romantic relationship, at least, you have a moment where you assess your relationship and you know, like, what are we doing here? And you check in, and there are no check-ins in friendship, you know? And I think that we really try to bring, after many years of making a lot of mistakes, we do have a check-in now that is like, hi, like, where do we stand? Like, what's going on? What are we trying to do? And I think that really doing that is important. You know, but I think that in terms of trust, like really early on, you have to show up, you know, you really have to mirror the other person. You show up when they show up, and you do that. But the thing about trust, as we all know, is that it is really easy to gain, and it is incredibly, you know, it is devastating when you lose it, and it's very hard to get back on that footing. And I hate to say it, but the only way to solve problems between two people is communicating. This is so boring, but it's like why therapists are billionaires, because there is no other way. It will not organically solve itself. It will not, there is not a pill. There is not a course. There is like, all you have to do is talk about it. And the thing about it that is hard is that it does take two people to make a relationship, you know? So even if you put your best foot forward, you have to mirror that. And so my boring answer really is that you have to check in. It is hard to be the person who initiates that conversation, but I find that it's very rewarding. Like Anne and I, you know, we have this part of our book where we say that we are the people who we invite people. And so that's why our community is big. Everyone wants to be invited. Nobody wants to do the inviting. And it is the same thing with the check-in and the trust. It seems really daunting, and, you know, you might feel silly being like, hey, I just, you know, like, what does our friendship mean to you? And what are you know, like, what are your needs? And it's the same muscle that you have to have in a romantic relationship, but you're applying in a completely platonic way. And, you know, and I know that it sounds hard and it sounds really silly, but actually, if you go out on that limb, a lot of times there's very good fruit for you there. So, you know, and I think that it's a good practice to have in a friendship.
Nice. At certain life stages, so this will say, we'll have Anne answer this one. At certain life stages where you may be too busy to maintain friendships, what would you say is the next step in these kinds of relationships?
You know, when we interviewed experts, you know, people who study friendship for the book, we heard pretty consistently that people's 30s and 40s are this low point for their friendships, because it tends to be a time when caregiving responsibilities and professional obligations and all these things like are really pushed to the foreground because of the way we fail to like have a safety net or take care of people in this country. I really think that's a big part of it. You know, like there's a lot of burden put on individuals. And so I just want to acknowledge that that crunch of like not having time for friendship is both real and it's kind of a choice we've collectively made policy wise, you know? And you know, it's also a result of like that thing I was saying earlier about living in really sort of siloed small households rather than in more explicit community. Like it is an inevitability, I think, that all of us at various points in our lives are going to feel like I just don't have the time I want for my friendships. And I think it comes for us each in different ways and at different times. But you know, again, the boring answer of communicate about it is really the only way. I think I have felt strengthened in my friendships when one of us has been able to acknowledge to the other, hey, I'm about to be heading into this really intense period for work, or like I'm starting a new romantic relationship and I know I'm the kind of person who gets swallowed for like the first 6 months when I'm in that like intense limerence phase. You know, whatever it is, if you can say it and acknowledge like, this is what's going on. I'm not tapping out of our friendship, but I want you to know that I am not going to be as present as I want to be. And let's check in about it. Or like, let's actually have a conversation about it. Or if something changes for you and you really do need me, I want you to like poke me or hear about it. Or, you know, maybe you just need a new way of keeping in touch or interacting. So like, instead of seeing each other 4 nights a week, you have a Saturday morning walk that you do together. And it's not the same as 4 nights a week, but it's like, that's time you can both keep. And I think it really goes back to that question about moving through different phases in life. Like if you can really say openly, rather than just kind of hiding and feeling bad about it, like say like, I don't have the time I wish I had, what can we do to make sure that we keep this connection? I think that's kind of all you can do. And that is really powerful and beautiful. That, again, back to the experts, they said that like friendships survive when you state the intention that you want them to survive. Hi, I want this friendship to still be here. What can we do about it?
Right, I'm going to medical school for 14 years. I'll be back. Like, please wait for me.
I love that. So last question, Aminatou, is what suggestions do you have for people who aren't so young to make new friends?
I mean, I am really lucky, I think, that I have friends who are much older than me in every decade, like up to 80s, and people who I really love. And I also have a collection of younger friends. And I do believe that being open to new seasons of friendship is actually really important and for personal development in a very selfish way. And so, you know, this again is like very boring. It is state your intentions to people. If you meet new people that you are interested in, you like friendship is like dating. You got to find the person and you got to tell them. And I think that as you get older and you know the limitations of your schedule, really stating that it's key. Like I tell people all the time, hello, I would like to be your friend. How do we make that happen? And it's so silly, you know, but you have to do that. I also think that, you know, like, all of the stuff that they tell you, like joining a club, having a hobby, something that you are interested in to find like-minded people, whether it is online or offline, is also really powerful. But stating the intention that you want to be someone's friend is great, you know? And I think that also television especially has conditioned us to the idea that everyone has more friends than you. Everyone is in some sort of like 6-person at a coffee shop, 4 ladies at brunch, or, you know, like everyone has a big group of friends. And I think that a lot of people feel a lot of shame about not being constantly surrounded by friends. And the truth is that like, that is television. It is not the truth. Like friendship is not, I'm like, where are you going to find like 9 people in their 30s whose schedule all line up? That's insane. You know, they probably either all work together or they are not doing anything together. And so I really think that like prizing like something that is small as opposed to wanting something that's sprawling is huge. But the older you are, the more you are going to have to pursue people. You will have to put yourself out there. You will have to state your intentions. Finding like-minded people in, you know, whether you're volunteering or you have a hobby with them or you're playing a sport or whatever it is a really good place to do that. But, you know, you have to be open to it and you will probably have to make the first move because, again, everyone wants to be invited. No one wants to do the inviting. So if you want friends, you should make the first move.
Awesome, folks. Well, we're going to wrap it up. So thank you so much for joining us, Ann and Aminatou. This was fantastic. And for our audience, if you have not bought this book, buy the book. If you weren't convinced before, you should be after this conversation today, and tune into their podcast, Call Your Girlfriend, as well. So thank you again for attending, and thank you again to our authors who joined us today.
Borrow our book from the library. We love libraries. Borrow the book from the library. Very important to us.
Thanks, David.
David, thank you so much for having us, and thank you to all of your students for being here. This means a lot.
Awesome. Thank you.